everyone. Let everyone grab a seat. But welcome everyone. My name's Daniel Maloney. I'm the Mayor of Ballarat, and welcome tonight to the Eureka Centre for this year's P Tobin Oration, presented by Shane Howard OAM. I'd like to start by today, especially acknowledging beautiful people, the Wadawurrung people, who on a day like today, when we consider issues of democracy, land wrongfully taken, and the place that we have as Australians, even more so, we should be paying special tribute to those First Peoples, the Wadawurrung people here, and I draw inspiration from their connection to the land, the waterways, and their way of life and their beautiful culture. So with that, I give and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and especially to anyone watching online right now, extend that love and respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome a couple of my councillor colleagues, Councillor Linda Coates and Councillor Mark Harris, the member for Bunningal, Michaela Settle, welcome, Terry Moran, AC, Chancellor of Federation University, Eric Howard AM, Marie Harrison and Bernard Tobin, who have joined us this evening. Welcome to the whole Tobin family. Tonight is in honour of their father, P Tobin OAM. Our guest speaker, welcome Shane Howard OAM, and accompanist Richard Tankard. I also have apologies from the Honourable Catherine King, member for Ballarat, the Honourable Dan Tehan, MP, member for Wannon, Juliana Addison, member for Wendouree, Paula Tobin and Michael Tobin, and Doug Sarah OAM. Tonight we meet on the 167th anniversary of the Eureka Stockade at the site in which this historic event occurred. Eureka continues to intrigue and engage people. It's got a profound impact on the Australian identity and the very character of our democracy. It's important as part of annual Eureka commemorations that we have annually the P Tobin Oration. And the late P Tobin OAM was passionate about Eureka and worked tirelessly to ensure it was remembered. At a time when interest in Eureka was in decline, he kept that spirit alive. Peter worked tirelessly in advancing the commemoration of Eureka, and throughout his time he was supported by his wife Faye. Sadly, Faye passed away in May this year, and I offer my condolences to the Tobin family. And I would like to tonight dedicate the P Tobin Oration to the memory of Faye Tobin. I'll now share with you as well an abridged version of the biography about P Tobin written by Ron Edgeboo. And that reads: P Tobin was born in 1941. His father Noel had been a funeral director in Maryborough, but relocated to Ballarat to assist with the education of his children. After Peter left school, he worked for a short time with his solicitors, with solicitors Burn Jones and Tawney, and then joined his father in the funeral business. Peter married his wife Faye in 1963. They had 4 children: Marie, Paula, Bernard and Michael. When Peter's father became ill, they relocated to the funeral premises in Dawson Street South, where they remained for 10 years. Peter, with his brother, also ran the Shoeing Forge service station on the corner of Dawson and Dana Streets. As well as being a prominent businessman in Ballarat, Peter also had a strong community-minded side. In 1979, Peter and Doug Sarah, together with a few others, formed the Eureka Commemorative Society to promote the significance of Eureka. The society sought to correct the historical perspective and importance of Eureka, encourage decision and debate, and honour the Eureka legacy. To this end, it was thought appropriate that a recognisable monument should be built to honour Eureka, and hence the large flagpole at the Bakery Hill roundabout was erected to fly the Eureka flag to mark the 125th anniversary of Eureka in 1979. Peter was also a member of the board of directors of Sovereign Hill, having held the position of president. Peter said that a major highlight of his life was the privilege of assisting the repatriation of the unknown Australian soldier from Villebretonne in France in November 1993. The soldier died at the end of World War I, and Peter and Rob Allison from Allison Funerals were given the responsibility of ensuring the safe passage of the soldier's body from France back to Australia. Turning to his home country, the unknown soldier was interred at the Hall of Memory at the Australian War Memorial on Armistice Day, the slouch hat, sprig of wattle and soil from the battlefield. Peter's passion and commitment to Eureka and his work to ensure its respectful and important place in Ballarat and Australia's history culminated in the staging of the 140th anniversary of the Eureka Uprising. After it had successfully concluded, he said that the Society had met all of its aims of the anniversary, arousing public interest, stimulating public debate, and helping restore the miners' and soldiers' graves in the old Ballarat cemetery. Peter said, Eureka must rank in the history of this country as an event that has generated more myths and facts, legends and information, passion and disinterest than any other event. Sadly, Peter died on 29th of March 2000, aged only 59. Tragic loss to Ballarat and Eureka. His contribution to our community and commemoration of the Eureka Stockade in particular is remembered annually through the P Tobin Oration. And that piece was by Ron Edberg. This year, the P Tobin Oration is presented by the acclaimed singer-songwriter and Eureka descendant Shane Howard, OAM. Tonight, Shane will speak about and perform, more importantly, songs of protest and social justice, songs that embody the spirit of Eureka. For 40 years, Shane Howard has established himself as one of Australia's most influential writers and singers. Shane's songs created a new map of Australia, from the Red Heart, where he penned the anthemic Solid Rock, to the wilds of Tasmania that gave birth to Let the Franklin Flow, and the spark of Eureka that captured in the song, in Rebel Song. He's created a uniquely Australian voice, I think we all agree. His songs contribute to plumb the depths and dig down into what it means to be a modern Australian. They reach across the globe and they champion the cause of common people, the environment and the curse of injustice. We are also pleased to welcome Richard Tankard, who will accompany Shane tonight. I'm pleased to note there won't be any question time at the conclusion of the event, but it is now my great pleasure to welcome Shane Howard, who I know has probably been itching to get back into performing as well too, after only having a few gigs this year due to COVID, but we are very blessed to have Shane and Richard here tonight, so I welcome Shane Howard to present the 2021 P Tobin Oration. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny, for that very generous introduction. And yes, you're right, I think we've forgotten how to do gigs, but we'll try and remember. We're on Wadawurrung country, and old stories, the oldest archetypal stories perhaps on earth. They're here in the country that we found our way to. I pay my respects to any of the descendants and to the elders, to the ancestors who kept this country in such beautiful condition. And I pay my respects to the Tobin family, and I feel very honoured to be invited to give the oration. I feel inadequate, but we'll see what we can make out of. It's probably more comfortable with a guitar in front of me, but I suppose that this is ostensibly a personal history, but it connects in its own small way to the much larger history of Eureka. I suppose it's true that a fuller view of history and society is gleaned from collections of personal stories. I'd like to tell you some stories and sing a few songs from my own and my family's history to illustrate those threads that flowed into and continue to flow on from Eureka. I was curious to understand what had brought my great-grandparents here from Ireland and what life on the goldfields was like in the 1850s in Wadawurrung country. My working life has been a journey from campfires to concert halls. I fell willingly into a life of song, playing, singing, travelling far and wide, gathering and songwriting, land rights and environmental anthems, and much more. I gathered an encyclopedia of stories in my travels from the multitude of people and experiences met along the way. Music is a gift, they say. I think it's a gift because it's given. And music was a gift from my mother. My father, on the other hand, told me that the attentive ear is the sage's dream. I came to understand the brutal injustice of our treatment of Aboriginal peoples, from our earliest colonial history to the more subtle forms of racism of the present day. I also came to understand the brutal colonial history of my Irish ancestors at the hands of the same colonial oppressors that inevitably led many Irish people to these shores. Somewhere in the midst of it all was a hunger for justice. Wikipedia says justice is the legal or philosophical theory by which fairness is administered. Anyone who's grown up with siblings knows how hardwired we are for fairness. Try giving only one of your young children an ice cream in front of your other young children. We laugh because we know the absurdity of... Well, the arc of history bends towards justice, said Martin Luther King. And I want to believe that's true. I think justice or injustice is at the heart of the incidents that led to the Eureka Stockade. And psychologists say that we are as hardwired for justice as we are for hunger. My dad couldn't stand injustice, and his unshakable honesty often put him at odds with others. He would often say, no one's above you and no one's below you. Maybe it was something he inherited from his grandfather, my great-grandfather, Patrick Howard, who was arrested on the goldfields at Ballarat in 1854, pretty close to here. Dad was born and raised in the unremarkable southwest Victorian coastal town of Dennington. I was too, along with my 4 brothers and 2 sisters. Dennington is 5 kilometres west of Warrnambool and ironically named after the village where Governor Charles Hotham was born in England, the man who presided over the government administration during the eventful chapters of the Eureka Stockade. It was a quietly spoken family mythology how great-grandfather Patrick had been a digger at the stockade and been present the morning that the British authorities attacked the miners' defensive stockade. 22 miners were killed that day by the redcoats, maybe more, by the redcoats of the British Army and an overzealous and corrupt police force who went on a bloodthirsty rampage after the battle, which had lasted less than half an hour. Another 10 were injured and 6 redcoats lost their lives. It's easy to get lost in the mythology and to forget the reality. Imagine a demonstration in Victoria today, in Ballarat today, where 22 protesters were shot and killed. 10 more were injured and 6 army soldiers, because the army had been called out, were also killed. It's no small thing. In the 1970s, Dad's sister, oldest sister, Auntie Moira, awoke my interest in Eureka. Your great-grandfather was arrested at the Eureka Stockade, she said, with some pride. He was also instrumental in the design of the flag, you know. It was a comment that we all took with a grain of salt, and we thought Dad's sister may have been elevating Grandfather Patrick's involvement in the stockade. But nearly 40 years later, Dad's first cousin, Ella Hancock, who we met at the Eureka anniversary but had never met previously, reinforced exactly the same story almost word for word as the second oral history. I wrote the rebel song in the mid-1970s as a tribute to my great-grandfather and the miners who took a stand against a corrupt authoritarian government and constabulary. I was young and I had a young person's view of things. There certainly weren't the historical resources and books around like there are now, as the Eureka history continues to broaden and deepen. They were brave, those people. They had the courage of their convictions. I wanted to honour them. I appropriated a segment of Henry Lawson's poem, Freedom on the Wallaby, for the chorus lyrics. Lawson had written the poem as a tribute to the shearers' strike of 1891. It seemed appropriate. We're the bold men of Eureka, in the misty light of morn. I swear that where my brother fell, I saw a baby born. Patrick came from a distant land, driven from his native home. He came to the lucky country shores, he was 18 years old. Haunted by famine and poverty, with stories he'd been told. He headed north from Melbourne town in search of Ballarat gold. Within a week, he laid a claim on a worthless ground. He worked the land with the two bare hands and barely anything he found. And the license fees became too great for honest men to pay. The rich may have their tables set, but the poor will have their day. And we'll sing a rebel song as others did before us, and we'll raise a rebel flag, join in a rebel chorus. Now the work was hard, the reward small on the fields of Ballarat. The license hounds got worse and worse, the government saw to that. One day the cry went up, the traps were out, they were hunting everyone, hunting free men like criminals at the point of a gun. And we'll sing a rebel song as others did before us, and we'll raise a rebel flag, join in a rebel chorus. By the men who sit in the seats of judgment, delirious with power, blind to the wrongs of Ballarat from behind their ivory tower. Until at Bakery Hill, when the world stood still and Lawler rallied the men to be free, they raised a cry under a Southern Cross: we'll die for liberty, and we'll sing the rebel song as others did before us, and we'll raise a rebel flag, join in a rebel chorus. What drives someone to take up arms, risk both life and limb? What rallies folks together to fight and not give in? We suffered in the old work, the injustice and the greed. No more, cried the Eureka men. We want equality, and we'll sing a rebel song as others did before us, and we'll raise a rebel flag, join in a rebel chorus. Sing a rebel song as others did before us, and we'll raise a rebel flag, join in a rebel chorus. coming back to me. Although they lost the battle, there's a lot of men in that song, Hey, Sorry Ladies, but the window got arranged by the historians in such a way that we couldn't see you until Claire Wright addressed that. Although they lost the battle, they won great reforms to parliamentary representation. And the Eureka Stockade is rightly and subsequently seen by many as the birthplace of Australian democracy. The reforms that the miners and the Ballarat Reform League won, representation in Parliament, reform of miners, licence tax, one man, one vote, quickly swept through other states in the entire British Empire. John Ireland states that the secret ballot, regular elections, payment of members of Parliament so that the poor might represent the poor, for example, they were all Victorian firsts. And they were on the Chartist program, of course. I performed Rebel Song on television in 1986 when the pugnacious children of Eureka founder, Paul Murphy, and I were guests on Clive Robertson's show. Sometime after the performance, Dad told me in hushed tones, "It's only a family oral story, son, and we can't be sure if grandfather's involvement was real or not." But in 1997, again at the invitation of Paul Murphy, I was asked to perform for a Eureka commemoration at the Old Melbourne Jail, where the 13 diggers arrested for treason after the battle at Eureka were imprisoned. I sang the rebel song right there beside the spot where Ned Kelly was hanged. After I sang, Ross Gibbs, who was the keeper of the public records at the time, presented me with a copy of my great-grandfather's arrest papers. My parents and a few siblings were present, and it was a powerful family moment that reinforced the importance of oral history. My Auntie Moira's and Dad's cousin Ella Hancock's stories had been vindicated in documented evidence. Patrick Howard was indeed a digger at the Eureka Stockade on December the 13th in 1954. And he was arrested, and his details read that William Malloy, Jacob Sorensen and Patrick Howard, who are charged this day before me, that they, on the 3rd day of December 1854 at Ballarat in the said colony, did with diverse other false traitors, a double negative, at present unknown, fire upon, attack and kill certain troops of our sovereign lady, the Queen. A trooper, James Locke, testified, "I was close by when Captain Wise fell. I saw prisoner Howard by a tent where a lot of men were standing. He was facing a little to the right. I fired at the mob, but not at him. Prisoner Howard was discharged. Sorensen and Malloy were committed for trial." The Argus newspaper also recorded his hearing and stated that the magistrate said he had had a narrow escape due to insufficient evidence. They could find no powder or caps or shot on his person. The Argus also reported that James Locke, the trooper, stated that "I saw several men in the stockade near the guard tent. They were armed with pikes and guns. Saw Howard first, was about to fire at him, but fired at a much larger mob." I'm lucky to be here. My dad was one of the last surviving grandchildren of a digger arrested at the stockade up until his death in 2010. Standing on the Eureka Monument at Ballarat with Coff Whitlam and Tom Keneally in 1997 at a Eureka commemoration, he said, "It's a very sad thing that those men, the men of Eureka, and also the troopers had to lose their lives because the men in authority were not prepared to negotiate a fair, just and civilised outcome." Gold Commissioner Reid and Governor Hotham's inability to respond to a world where the old social order was changing dramatically led to bloodshed. Democracy was a radical idea at the time. Under Hotham's orders, the soldiers were officially sent to put down the democratic movement at Eureka at one blow. Reid and Hotham's biggest fear was a democratic uprising or a rise in democratic feeling among the populace. In America, republicanism and independence from British rule had already been achieved. In Britain, the Chartists were gaining traction. From Italy came Garibaldi's rebels. The world at the time of the Eureka Stockade was aflame with change. Historian Anne Beggs-Sunter acknowledges that Hotham would have been aware of the revolutionary movement in Europe in 1848, a year of popular democratic uprising. popular revolutions that occurred in Germany, Italy, the French Empire had been shaken, another failed Irish plot foiled, and in England the government had to move ruthlessly to suppress the huge demonstrations supporting democratic parliamentary reform organised by the Chartists. Half the nations of the world were on the goldfields at Ballarat. Irish rebel songs and tunes rang out across the goldfields, loudest near the Eureka lead, where the Tipperary mob held sway. The goldfields were a hotbed of revolutionary ideas such as liberation, representation and rights, and as well as political exiles from Europe, many of the Chinese were also refugees from China's Taiping Rebellion, a civil war that raged between 1850 and 1864 and saw 20 to 30 million Chinese people killed. Anne Beg Sunter also believes that the British government feared attempts to establish a republic in Australia. Hotham had reason to believe that he was dealing with more than simple disaffection with the gold licence system. He saw signs of a rebellion against the Queen's authority, which had democratic and republican aspects. She adds that Hotham's predecessor, La Trobe, was presented with a monster petition from the goldfields on the 1st of August 1853, seeking immediate reform of the government administration, the right to vote for the unrepresented diggers and land reform. There were so many signatures, it was 13 metres long. John Ireland, at the launch of the Eureka 150 Democracy Conference, maintained that the Charters were demanding what the Victorian government were putting down, democracy. We became one of the first democratic nations in the world, he said. Admittedly, we were totally blind to the rights of Aboriginal people and other non-white people to vote. The Goldfields administration was heavy-handed and authoritarian. Injustices, corruption, repeated humiliation, compounded resentment until the diggers, led by Peter Lalor, an Irishman, erected a defensive stockade and swore to defend each other. Many burnt their gold licences. It's not quite right, I think, in retrospect, to call them rebels. The diggers did not attack the government, it was a defence. Behind their rickety stockade, they simply sought to defend each other. And at 4 a.m. on Sunday morning of December the 3rd, 1854, the government redcoats attacked when they knew that diggers' defences were at their weakest. Against the overwhelming force of well-trained soldiers and angry vindictive troopers, the diggers were quickly overrun, and in the aftermath, civilians were indiscriminately killed by Goldfields police. It was an unnecessary bloodbath. 10,000 Victorians, outraged by the government brutality, marched on Parliament, and the mood for democracy and reform had arrived. Mark Twain visited Ballarat and the site of the stockade in 1895 and wrote of it, "By and by there was a result, and I think it may be called the finest thing in Australasian history. It was a revolution, small in size, but great politically. It was a strike for liberty, a struggle for principle, a stand against injustice and oppression. It's another instance of a victory won by a lost battle. It adds an honourable page to history. The people know it and are proud of it. They keep green the memory of the men who fell at the Eureka Stockade." Karl Marx was to observe of the oppressive causes that led to the Eureka incident. It is not difficult to notice that these, in reality, are the same reasons which led to the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America. Within a few years, the reforms that diggers demanded were made law. New rights swept through Australia and the British Empire. Peter Lalor, a wanted man with a price on his head in 1853, was elected to Parliament. In 1857, 3 years after the stockade, Victoria's constitution was amended and all men over the age of 21 were granted the right to vote. Women didn't get the vote in Victoria until 1908. Sorry again, ladies. And Aboriginal people not until 1967. In addition, candidates were no longer required to own land. Standing before the tattered and hacked remains of the Eureka flag in Ballarat in his Eureka address in the 1990s, Gough Whitlam stated that the secret ballot in the USA is still referred to as the Australian ballot. Australians have good reason to be proud of their democratic legacy. Gough went on to elucidate the original flag of Australia was an ensign, white background and a red cross, not the Union Jack. The Irish on the goldfields, driven from their ancestral lands by the Great Hunger, were bone-tired of landlords and monarchies and wanted a say in how they were governed. So did the Scots who had been displaced by Highland clearances. So too did the English Chartists who had a democratic philosophy and the language to articulate it. At a time in history when people across Europe, America and even China had grown tired of despots and failed kings and emperors, the men and women of Eureka wrote and supported the Ballarat Reform League Charter. Law is not greater than justice. Taxation without representation is tyranny. Manhood suffrage. Every citizen must have a voice in making the laws they are called upon to obey. Equal laws and equal rights for the whole free community. The prerogative of the people is the most royal of all prerogatives, as the people are the only legitimate source of all political power. These are not the words of a rowdy rabble. We know that the great majority of males on the Ballarat goldfields were literate, but Eureka did not succeed in responding to all issues of equality. Discrimination against the rights of women, Aboriginal people and the Chinese remained. Let us not overgild the lily. The folk historian Jan Wazitsky, a founding member of the mighty and evergreen Australian folk band the Bushwhackers, informed me that there was a similar Reform League meeting on the Castlemaine goldfields around the same time, chaired by a P. Howard, that advocated universal suffrage, thus including women. We wondered, and I'd like to think it might have been my great-grandfather Patrick, and I'd like to find some more information about that. So far, the editor of the Ballarat Times newspaper, Henry Seacamp, who was the only person jailed for sedition for his commentaries in the paper leading up to the battle, wrote, "It must never be forgotten in the future history of this great country that on Saturday, November the 11th, 1854 on Bakery Hill, and in the presence of about 10,000 men, was first proposed and unanimously adopted the draft prospectus of Australian independence." We refer to that of the Ballarat Reform League. The goldfields must have been a great leveller. It must have been tough for everyone just to stitch civility together. Catholics and Protestants, Freemasons and Fenians, all worked side by side in difficult conditions, and they needed one another. George Black shared a tent with H.R. Nichols on the goldfields. Although most of the diggers that lost their lives were Irish, Eureka was more than a British-Irish struggle. 18 nationalities were represented in the stockade: Irish, Scots, Welsh, Cornish, Spanish, Italian, Jamaican, Jewish and native Australian diggers were present, who all dreamed of a new way in a new land and wished to improve their lot. Reid and Hotham failed to see that old world alliances were not as meaningful in this new world. New tolerances had been forged. Patrick Daniel Howard was born in 1826, raised in the family home in the seaside village of Baldoyle, County Dublin. He left Dublin for Melbourne and was not long at Ballarat when the trouble erupted. In the year after the Eureka Stockade, Patrick married Eliza Darcy from Ennis, County Clare, at St Olympius's church in Ballarat. There is a story from family oral history that she walked across a dry Lake Wendouree in her wedding dress to her wedding. They had 12 children. Patrick and Eliza's fortune changed according to the Ballarat Star newspaper on October the 27th, 1856, when Patrick Howard and his party found a nugget of 268 ounces, 800 weight at Brown's Diggings at a depth of 70 feet. We're still looking for it. He ended his days on the Ballarat and District goldfields as a mine manager, and he and Eliza spent their remaining days with family at Birregurra, where he died and was buried at the nearby Illawarra Cemetery. Eliza's family, the Darcys, were farming at Birregurra at the time. He was a seaman on arrival in Australia, a gold miner at marriage and a miner at death. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people on the goldfields would have shared similar histories and experiences, and would have been moved by the same tectonic historical forces that brought my ancestors here to Ballarat. And I'd like to talk a little about that. Like so many others, my great-grandparents, Patrick Howard and Eliza Darcy, would have been drawn to the goldfields of Ballarat with the promise of opportunity. They were both Irish, and like so many Irish immigrants of the time, they wound up on the Ballarat goldfields as refugees from the brutal hardships of the Great Hunger. on Gorta Moor in the late 1840s. I was born in the Silvermines Mountains, 1842. The daughter of a farmer, our life was hard and true. The famine stole my family, I buried everyone. No mother's love to comfort me, an orphan I'd become. Standing on that Geared Cove in the early morning rain, knowing that I'd never see my native land again. So much at stake, young hearts to break with the disappearing shore. I say goodbye to innocence, you can't have it anymore. Set upon the open seas to the corners of the world, just like lambs to the slaughter, into this hell we're hurled. My only dream was to survive, I was just a girl. Go and hide your face, hide your fear in these dark and tangled curls. Still I will be with you where I go. No matter how far between us the distance grows, still I will be with you where I go. Time we reach that fatal shore, men whose crime was to defend their native land alone. I saw dark-skinned men with noble heads, they were bound in iron chains. Native people at the mercy of my same oppressor's reign. I had dreams beyond my means, never great expectation. Still I will be with you where I go. No matter how far between us the distance grows, still I will be with you where I go. I was born in the Silvermines Mountains, 1842. That was actually written for my mother's grandmother, true story, and I've since been back to the little collection of 4 houses, the Cranog, I suppose, or the Cran, where she came from, and there's still a branch of the family there in Tipperary. But it sets a scene for what life was like, I guess, for so many of those people of Irish background who came here, and so many others. But to put it in context, back in the 12th century, right, the English king, Henry II, invaded Ireland. Over time, the English monarchs gained control of the entire country, but it wasn't until the mid-1600s and the genocidal reign of Oliver Cromwell that oversaw the end of the ancient Gaelic social order, the decline of native culture and Irish language through severe penal laws against Irish Catholics and the widespread confiscation of native Irish lands. Ireland kept resisting with never-ending uprisings, skirmishes, rebellions and political movements, all crushed violently in bloody battle, hangings, imprisonment or transportation to penal servitude. By the 1840s, the oppression was so complete that the native Irish population were reduced to subsisting on little more than the humble potato. Everything else went to their English landlords to pay the rent. Then in 1846, a strange fog came upon the country and the blight broke out, afflicting the potato crop for several years and ushering in the cataclysmic Angorta Mór, or the Great Hunger. Within a handful of years, more than 1 million people had died of starvation and associated diseases, and 2 to 3 million people fled a racked and ravaged country as migrants and refugees in utter desperation on boats to America, Australia, Canada and New Zealand, while boatloads of food were constantly leaving Ireland for England, filled with produce that could have sustained the Irish. Lord Russell's Whig government appointed Charles Trevelyan as head of famine relief. Trevelyan did not disguise his contempt for Irish Catholics and stated that the famine may have been God's punishment and a natural solution to the Irish problem. He pursued a laissez-faire approach to famine relief that wouldn't interfere with market forces in Ireland. As a consequence, the mass death from starvation and disease were preventable, as vast quantities of food were still leaving Ireland on schedule for England. My wife and I stood on what is often referred to as the hungry grass in the famine pot graveyard in West Kerry with Maurice O'Scanlan some years ago. It rests above the workhouse where people could go and get some watery soup during the famine in return for labour, because the government could not be seen to be giving rations to people for nothing, even though they were starving. Looking across the bay from the famine plot, you can see the elaborate manor house of Lord Ventry, where landlords and landed gentry indulged in 7-course dishes while the native Irish were starving to death in their thousands. It is estimated that 5,000 people are buried in that 1-acre plot in West Kerry, with not a headstone for any of them, save a few rocks here and there. The story is repeated all across Ireland. According to historian and Irish language translator Ted Ryan, one eyewitness wrote, "The hunger killed everything." It was cheaper for the English landlords in the end to send tenant farmers away to distant shores than to pay the tax for famine relief. Suffice it to say that this severe colonial oppression was the background for many of the Irish who found themselves on the goldfields at Eureka. A great many Irish flocked to the colony of Victoria, where fate and gold drew them to Ballarat and Wurrung country. But this new world was still a British colony, where the Irish were still ranked by their language and their religion. But the world was aflame with change. Like I said earlier, Eureka was about much more than an Irish-English dispute. But it's really important to acknowledge that the Irish was central to the mood for change that played out at the Eureka Stockade. Of the 34 dead and wounded, at least 22 or 65% were Irish. Twenty years ago, I met with the historians, nearly 22 years ago, Ian Clark and Fred Carr. Ian's scars in the landscape and his work collating and editing George Augustus Robinson's journals was foundational work for the study of Aboriginal history in Victoria and in the Western District in particular. Fred Carr has done so much since to comprehensively document the Aboriginal presence in this Wadawurrung country, from first contact to occupation of the land by squatters and then the pre- and post-gold rush history. When I asked Fred back then about Wadawurrung people on the goldfields, he said that they were there. They were all over the diggings, but previous histories had arranged the window of our historical view in such a way that they just could not be seen. But they were there. Despite their absence from most written histories, Fred has scoured an enormous amount of source material to reveal the Wadawurrung men and women who were very present on the Ballarat goldfields. In his books Black Gold and his recent book My Country All Gone, The White Men Have Stolen It, Fred details an extraordinary number of accounts from historical source material of Aboriginal presence on the goldfields and the recurring close interactions with diggers. Recognition has been tardy on the topic, he says. In many instances, monuments, local history publications, and indeed general gold historiography could be accused of selectively culling Aboriginal guides from its point of vision. History is the poorer for it. Another Ballarat historian, Dr. Anne Begg-Sunter, told me an anecdotal story of how Aboriginal people protected the diggers' children during the Eureka battle by taking them away into the bush and returning them to their parents when the battle had subsided. No small irony there. My friend Ted Ryan, a self-taught Irish speaker from the Mallee and an historian, showed me a newspaper report of the trial of the Crown against Timothy Hayes, one of the 13 diggers for treason. The article describes a witness for the defence by the name of Campbell, who was described in the newspaper reports as a half-caste. The more you look, the more evidence exists that Aboriginal people were all through the Eureka story. There is also a feeling that Aboriginal people were seen sympathetically by many of the diggers on the goldfields as the lords of the land. One of the first things that newly arrived diggers would do was to negotiate with the local Wathaurong people for a dullong, or possum skin cloak. There was significant trade in these items. Eugene von Gerard's painting, The Barter, records this experience. It shows a European gentleman in a submissive pose on bended knee, probably on the track from Geelong to Ballarat goldfields on the Barwon River, purchasing a possum skin cloak from a local Wadawurrung man who was standing. Aboriginal people were very well paid for these items, apparently between £3 to £5, a considerable sum of money at the time. The significant role Aboriginal people played not only on the goldfields but in every aspect of colonial incursion is now unquestionable thanks to Fred Carr's research. What Carr found were those hidden accounts of Aboriginal people working alongside and integrating with white settlers and vice versa. There's a great story by Antoine Fauchery, the French photographer, wandering through the goldfields, and he sets up to camp one night and cook his dinner, and this Aboriginal fella comes and sits down at his camp and silently and slowly just wears him down, little bread, and he goes, no, I'm not giving you any bread, no, and eventually he just keeps going, just a tiny little bit, and he wears him down, just this much here, and wears him down. And it's a very good-natured and humorous encounter, and of course they both end up sharing the entire meal and the drink. Fred says that early white settlers acknowledged their reliance on Aboriginal people, but then a veil was drawn when it came to federation. The pastoralists came first in the 1830s, and they wanted occupation of the land. That was a time of two nations warring. There were distinct laws to Wadawurrung people. They had a distinct language. They did not treaty their land, says Fred Carr. We have to concede that the British took it by force. This was a military conquest and there's no getting around it. British military officers fired ship cannons at retreating Wadawurrung, Carr says. This was not a settlement that suggests a civil occupation. The first governor of Victoria was a military officer. There was no legislative house. Men were taking orders. Between 1800 and 1870 on Wadawurrung country, the British came, then the squatters, then the gold seekers. There were countless records acknowledging, initially at least, the dependency of whitefellas on Aboriginals and a reliance on Aboriginal bioculture. Carr goes on to say that the records acknowledge Aboriginal men were the best workers on the early sheep stations. They could track the sheep better, ride horses better, and took to guns with expert use. And some took to wearing European clothes. They were quick to transform themselves into the society imposed on them. And Carr found interactions of Aboriginal people learning the English language, singing songs with whitefellas, learning where settlers kept their guns, and he said whitefellas would similarly engage with Aboriginal people. Now that Victoria moves closer to becoming the first state to enter formal treaty negotiations with Aboriginal Victorians, such truth-telling of our history is invaluable to give us a truer picture of colonial times. I'd like to think that solid rock may have helped to stoke the coals of a fire for Aboriginal rights nearly 40 years ago, and in some small way prompted people to look further and dig a bit deeper into the true history of our country. I know it made me do that. This country's full of stories. Some of them are ancient and epic Aboriginal stories, and many of them are among the oldest ancient archetypal stories on earth. I don't know whether I can change anyone's mind with a song, but I know that by adding a part of light to the sum of light, hidden things in time may be revealed. I can say with some personal certainty that ideas that were considered fringe and on the periphery 30 or 40 years ago have now drifted into mainstream thinking. What do I think really? Democracy is a fragile thing, and it's not that old. It is tied to our deep notions of justice. It prevents war. The events of January 2021 in the United States remind us of the fragility of our democratic societies. Beliefs are not always shared. The struggle to outlaw slavery was met with fierce resistance for decades and was considered by many, mostly those who stood to profit from it, to be absolutely justifiable, to the point of being defended in the English Parliament and to the letter of the law. Democracy requires vigilance and engagement from us all if we are to avoid despotic governance. That's what happened at Eureka, and we're honour bound to uphold what so many of those people lost their lives creating and defending on December the 3rd, 1854. We should never take it for granted. Inevitably, the voice of the majority draws from minority voices on the fringes that make their way to the centre by strength of argument. The writers, the painters, the poets, the songwriters, all the artists, they paint it, talk it, write it, sing it, and 20 years later it's legislation. Song, music, art, all play a vital role in the mechanics of change, and just as importantly, of holding memory. Like many others, Henry Lawson included, I think the unfinished business begun at Eureka is an Australian Republic. But I also think it would be a hollow reality without a meaningful treaty with the First Nations people of this country. How that will be achieved is a matter for greater minds than mine, but the legal framework for such a possibility is not beyond us. This country was stolen. We know enough now to address truthfully the brutal colonial history of our country. No good can come of such a thing unless we are content to live in a world where the biggest bully rules. Why should we fear our own bold ability to recraft our constitution and maybe discuss a Bill of Rights? Are these matters beyond the Australian people? I don't think so. We have the opportunity of learning from the successes and failings of a number of models from around the world, as well as our own history, and fashioning our own unique and bold solution in the 21st century as the men and women of Eureka did before us in the 19th century at Ballarat. There is no reason why the democratic legacy bequeathed to us from Eureka that bound so many different nationalities together in a common cause should not inspire us to further develop a democracy in accord with its First Nations peoples and their deep history of this country, to serve as a beacon of hope in an age of uncertainty, in a troubled world. Changing, not in a hurried way. You can feel the endlessness, the coming of the light of day. Talking about a chosen place, we'll sell it in a marketplace. Look at solid rock, standing on sacred ground, living on borrowed time, and the winds of change blowing down the line. Right down that rabbit-proof fence. Time, dreaming again. Proud people come, living here in a promised land, running from a heart of darkness, searching for that heart of light. This could be paradise. Time, and the winds of change, they were blowing cold that night. Standing on the shore one day, water all white sails in the sun. Wasn't long before you felt that sting. White man, white law, white Koronka, Narani, Walba Campo, Chaparani, Walba Polka Ringani, Pulikumponka, Narani, Monte Mil Pagatu, Yutuironka, Narani, Walba Campo, Chaparani, Walba Polka Ringani, solid rock, standing on sacred ground, living on borrowed time. The winds of change keep blowing down like
Hey.
Richard Tankard. Yeah. The maestro. I've gone way over time, so I'll keep this brief. But basically, your silence sings to me. Goanna had cut its teeth playing gigs along the Great Ocean Road. We came out of Geelong, really. We're a Western District band. And we played a number of Save the Otway benefit concerts. And as we watched the Otways shrink from my childhood to the 80s to heading towards a postage stamp, there was no old growth forest left. Like so many other unique hardwood forests in our state, they were being heavily logged for wood chipping, for tissues, for toilet paper, and they were being sold basically for pittance. It wasn't selective logging like the days of old. It was clear felling forest coops and napalming what remained afterwards to replant non-native pine forests. Inevitably, it led me to Save the Franklin River No Dams campaign, headed by the charismatic Bob Brown. And that dam that they wanted to build on the Franklin River would have flooded the Kootakeena Cave, the Kootakeena Cave, I should say, the site of the most southerly human occupation in the world during the last ice age, and it held evidence of Aboriginal occupation up until 12,000 years ago. The cave contained one of the richest artefact deposits ever found in Tasmania and Australia. I admired Bob Brown. There was no trickery. He was who he pretended to be. And he was committed to non-violent action. He was someone you could trust, and he's held my trust and my respect ever since. Our manager, Ian Lovell, Bob had said to me, when I met him in Sydney, he said, you should go down and see for yourself then. So I did, moved by the compelling photographs of Peter Dombrovskis and Alagus Strachanis' hauntingly beautiful photographs of Lake Pedder that was lost to us. I started work tentatively on a song for the Franklin River. Our manager, Anne Lovell, had given strict instructions that I was not allowed to get arrested because we had the big Stop the Drop concert coming up the following weekend at the My Music Bowl in Melbourne with Midnight Oil and Red Gum. And Bob warned us that Tasmania was very divided on the issues, even within families. And if you get your car windows broken, if you had a No Dam sticker on there. We camped the night at the base camp in Strawn. You had to go through an initiation process of how to be arrested, how to behave non-violently, and problematic people were weeded out there. I was impressed by this well-organised group of people of my generation, not a raggle-taggle group of naive, well-intentioned fools. They had a clear plan and they were very well organised. As we continued up the river heading to the protest camp, the full majesty of this incredible natural cathedral of evolved creation unfolded. And reality bit back as we passed the pontoons, ferrying the heavy machinery up to Warner's Landing, where the destruction of this magnificent wild country was already taking place. Life was hard there at that camp. It was damp and wet, and there were very few creature comforts. The footage from my old Super 8 camera tells the tale of a great and buoyant atmosphere, despite the difficult living conditions. I marvelled at all these young people of my generation who, at great personal risk, inconvenience and their own expense, were willing to be arrested and go to jail to defend such natural beauty. I stood in the presence of 3,000 and 4,000 year old human pine trees that were here before Christ or Muhammad or Buddha ever walked the earth. I walked through filtered green light and the dark vertical tree trunks on a path to gather water from the Franklin River, in awe of the mystery and the majesty. It was overwhelming to witness that miracle of the natural world, grander than any cathedral made by man, and in its reverential silence, the spirit of the place sang to me. I returned from Tasmania to Melbourne, travelled to Lorne with my family and worked solidly on the Franklin River. And now I had a title, Let the Franklin Flow. I had to work quickly because I wanted to perform the song at the Stop the Drop concert the next weekend in Melbourne. The song hit the airwaves, and because we had the ear of the media at the time, it had high rotation on radio across the country. And it helped to keep the issue alive in the media just as it was beginning to fade from the headlines. We added our little bit of light to the sum of light, and the royalties went to help the Tasmanian Wilderness Society. It raised several $1,000s. Goanna toured Tasmania later in '83, and it was a very, very successful tour. Bob Hawke and Paul Keating led the Labor Party to victory in March '83 with the promise to protect the Franklin from being dammed. Robin Gray, the Premier of Tasmania, referred to the Franklin as a leech-infested ditch, refused to abide by the federal government's proclamation claiming state rights over Commonwealth intervention. It went to the High Court, and on the 1st of July 1983, the High Court handed down its decision, asserting that the Commonwealth had the powers to override state governments on matters of national significance, and a stop work was issued immediately. The Franklin River, unlike Lake Pedder, was saved and preserved, and the dam was never built. That one environmental success of the Franklin River helped to keep a trace of hope afloat in a world mad with greed and consumption. It was a legal and political solution in the end that saved the Franklin River, but a solution that would not have been achievable without the efforts of so many young people, the unsung heroes who gave their time and energy at their own risk and expense to raise awareness and to keep the issue alive at a grassroots level. It was the beginning of Australia's environmental movement. Our challenge in the 21st century is climate justice. And it is no less important than the Eureka Stockade. Thank you. Do we have time for another song, or are we... I can't find an organiser anywhere.
Great introduction, we've got to play it then.
In the neighbourhood of F?
Yeah.
Okay. We tune because you care. Not long after I was at the Franklin River, a few weeks after I left, some young blokes from down there went in and set fire and destroyed a 4,000-year-old human pine tree. It's kind of at that point that we've really lost our way, hey, with our relationship with our country. Silence sings to me. So let the Franklin fall, let the wildlands be. The wilderness should be strong and free. Kootakina to the southwest shore has to be something worth fighting for. Fell the forest and we scar the land, has to be something worth fighting for. Desecrated with greedy hands, destroy the beauty that nature planned. Let the Franklin fall, let the wildlands be. The wilderness should be strong and free. Kootakina to the southwest shore has to be something worth fighting for. 1,000 people arrested and bailed. There should be something worth fighting for. Voices crying in a wilderness, saying this is something worth fighting for. Let the Franklin flow, let the wildlands be. Wilderness should be strong and free. Kootakina to the southwest shore has to be something worth fighting for. Oh, Tasmania, hardest heart could understand. Just to feel your wilderness, your silence sings to me. Let the Franklin flow, let the wildlands be. Take good care of this country. From Kootakina to the Tarkine shores has to be something worth fighting for. Franklin, let the wildlands be. The wilderness should be strong and free. Kootakina to the southwest shore has to be something worth fighting for. Chorus Miller Margaret. Thanks, Rick.
Again, say thank you very much for tonight's P Tobin Oration to Shane Howard and Richard Tankard. Thank God for those fringe minority voices that through reasoned argument become mainstream and turn into songs that become legislation in the years to come. Beautiful, and thank you so much once again. Much appreciated.